I think we're ready to go. If you can take your seats, please. And just to let you know, Jacob here is going to be filming the entire evening, and we'll post the video on YouTube by early tomorrow morning at the latest. And so we will send the link, we'll put it on our Facebook page, and we will send it out to all the candidates, and we hope that that will, you will help get the word out about the YouTube video. So, because frankly, that I think the internet audience is probably the bigger one and the more important one here tonight. So, but anyway, and so we're going to go and start, and with some remarks from Susan Simpson. She's our state president for the Wyoming League of Women Voters.
Good evening and welcome. I was all set to introduce myself, but I don't need to now. There we go. The League of Women Voters was founded almost 100 years ago as Women Won the Right to Vote. We're a nonpartisan, grassroots organization that wants a democracy where everyone has the desire, the right, the knowledge, and the confidence to participate. You're here, you're getting there to that level. Anyone 16 or older can join. We welcome you if you'd like to. The League has sponsored candidate forums in Cheyenne, Laramie, Gillette, and Jackson. Go to our Facebook page and you can get information on how to get to recordings of those forums. We also published a statewide voter guide, which is posted on our website, wyoming.lwv.org. Our federal and statewide candidate information is also posted at vote411.org. I'm going to give you brief biographies of the candidates, and we'll then introduce Marguerite Herman, the forum moderator, who will explain the forum guidelines and ask the questions submitted by League of Women Voters members and the public. I'm a librarian, so I have to give you a source. The biographical information came from the Legislative Service Office, candidates' websites, the voter guide, the 2017-18 Legislative Directory, and one TV interview. Candidates are named in alphabetical order by office. State Auditor. The position earns $92,000 a year and has no term limits. Jeff Doctor, a Democrat, grew up in rural Circle, Montana, working on the family farm until it was sold. His interest in politics and public service began with his grandfather, who was the mayor of Circle, and continued when he went door to door with his father, who was running for a House seat in Colorado. He has degrees in political science and public administration. He is a certified project manager and has worked with the Department of Family Services since 2003. He most recently analyzed cloud services to reduce costs and examined the current hardware and software infrastructure that we have. Christy Racines, Republican, was born in Casper and has lived all over the state. After attending high school in Riverton, she went to the University of Wyoming and got degrees in accounting and Spanish. She is a CPA who worked in the private sector on in-depth audits for businesses, nonprofits, and government. Currently, she is the Chief Fiscal Officer and Director of Human Resources for Wyoming Judicial Branch. She manages and prepares and manages a statewide budget of approximately $80 million. Nathan Winters, a Republican, graduated from high school in Cheyenne and has a bachelor's degree in theology and a master's in religious education from West Coast Baptist College. He is the pastor at the First Baptist Church in Thermopolis and began his first term as a representative for House District 28 in 2013. He is on the Management Audit Committee, Judiciary Committee, and on the CSG, which is the Council of State Governments, yes, Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, and has served on the National Council of State Legislators, Communications, Financial Services, and Interstate Commerce Committee. Now I can go on with the other candidates, but I think we'll wait, let you ask the questions, and then go on. Marguerite Herman is a member of the League of Women Voters of Cheyenne, our lobbyist, a school board member, an experienced moderator, and she will take over from now.
All right, thank you. And, oops. Just a word that just let everyone know that early voting has begun through mail-in paper absentee ballots, or in many counties in a polling place in the county building. Here in Laramie County, it's at our government complex. So you just check with your county clerks if you would like a sample ballot. Reminder, primary election day is August 21st, and general election day is November 6th. If you do mail in a ballot, absentee ballot, try to get it posted by August 13th. Our county clerk here is making sure everyone knows that you've got to give it plenty of time to come back into the county clerk to be counted by 7 p.m. on election day. Otherwise, it will not count, and that would be a shame to have someone going to the trouble of voting and not having it count. Also, please note that these are offices of 2 of the top 5 elected officials in the state. They are provided for in the Wyoming Constitution. They serve for 4 years, as Susan said. So for the format for tonight, we will have 2 minutes to open, and then each question will have a minute and a half, and then an optional 30 seconds you can take to respond or add to whatever comment you made, and then 2 minutes to close. And we'll try to get through 4 or 5 questions depending on how fast things go. And Lindy Kirkbride is going to help with the timing. She'll let you know when you hit the 1 minute mark, 30 seconds, 15 seconds, etc. And she has a handy timer that you can actually is audible too. But she'll try not to be distracting, but also let you know when your time's getting short. So we'll go ahead and get started. Oh, and to let you know, what we'll do is we'll stagger the beginning person answering, so move down the line. So the first person would be Jeff Doctor, and you have 2 minutes to make an opening. Use any way you want. Oh, yes, okay. Probably one. Just hold it close enough, Doug.
All right, well, thank you. Again, my name is Jeff Doctor, and I want to thank the League of Women Voters for putting this on. I want to say it's great to be here in Cheyenne, where I get to go home tonight and sleep in my own bed and not have to travel back or travel across the state. So Nathan, it's nice to have you on our territory for once. I want to thank you for this opportunity. I'm calling this the biggest job interview of my life. And what I mean by that is, I'm not taking this for granted. This is something that I've thought long and hard about. I've wanted to run for public office for quite some time. And I chose the auditor's office in part because my wife suggested it. She said, why don't you go take a look at it? And when I went out and took a look at the budget, what I found was that 66% of the biennium budget for the auditor's office in 1920 is technology related. The other 33% goes to the salaries of the staff who support and provide good customer service to the state of Wyoming. And so when I was looking at my skills and my background and my 15 years in state government, I have been working in information technology. And so I said, you know what, this really matches up with my experience. And that's when I decided to jump into the race. So tonight I'm going to be making the argument that the auditor's office is a technology office. And so what I bring to that is my experience, 15 years of state government. And to highlight some of that experience, I got started with the Department of Family Services in 2003. And one of the first things I did there is I took a process. We had a new eligibility system called the LEAP system. It was taking 60 days to make a payment on behalf of a citizen who was receiving a LEAP benefit. And that is just not good government. And I'm proud to say I worked to take that process down to less than 8 business hours. And so that's where I kind of got my start in technology, and my career has just continued forward with that. So I look forward to visiting with you tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Racines.
Good evening, everyone. I would echo Jeff's comments that it is very nice to be home. I know that all 3 of us have been on the road a ridiculous amount, and that's, we should be. We need to get out and meet folks. I want to thank Marguerite and Susan and Lindy for putting this on, and the League of Women Voters in general, but really I want to thank all of you for coming out. It's a beautiful evening. It's not hailing. There's a lot of other things you could be doing, and this is critical that you're coming out and educating yourself, so I really, really appreciate you being part of that process because it is critical, particularly in positions like the auditor and treasurer that fly under the radar. My name is Christy Racinas, and I'm running to be state auditor because I believe in a government that is efficient, effective, and accountable to the people. A little bit from my bio, which you already heard. I was born and raised here in Wyoming, 4th generation native. My great-grandparents and grandparents were in ranching, mostly sheep. My father worked in oil and gas my entire life, so I understand how important that is to our economy. Riverton High School grad, accounting degree, Spanish degree, which is slightly less relevant to this endeavor, although I'm told it shows I'm educatable, so there's that. CPA, I worked in auditing for quite some time, and I'll spoil it and say the state auditor is not an auditor, but what you do as an auditor, when you go into an entity, you have to become a subject matter expert on whatever you're looking at. That's incredibly relevant to this position, because I think it's a fallacy to think that anyone can step into this position on the boards and commissions and be an absolute expert in everything that comes before those boards. So right now I have a husband, 2 kids. We live north of Cheyenne here. I can't imagine raising my kids anywhere else than Wyoming. We're avid hunters and sportsmen, and I look forward to talking a little bit more about the office. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Winters.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here this evening. I'm actually from Thermopolis. I grew up here in Cheyenne, though. And though I'm from Thermopolis, where I'm a pastor and a legislator, my legislative district is a little larger than the state of Connecticut. It takes in Basin, Burlington, Otto, Meeteetse, all of Hot Springs County. 20% of Fremont County is a very big area, but it matters because I've been representing those small communities. And in the legislature, I've worked hard for a smart, thoughtful, kind, constitutional conservatism that really believes that government should be efficient and transparent in how it conducts business. And that's the reason why I'm running for Wyoming State Auditor. In 1989, the auditing CPA functions were taken out of the auditor's office and placed under a new department called the Department of Audit, with a director appointed by the governor. Since that time, the Wyoming State Auditor is an individual that certainly needs policy experience and leadership skill. There are 2 variations of way people that, in different ways people see that office. One is to believe that they need to micromanage every single thing. While there are tremendous individuals that work in that office, and one needs to give them the best environment in which to work. The other, though, is to basically see themselves as a figurehead. That would be a horrible situation because, again, it devolves into chaos. What one needs is leadership skill. And I've been blessed to develop that in my time as House Republican Caucus Chairman, Vice Chairman of Judiciary, on the Legislative Management Audit Committee, which does program audits, and also on the Minerals Business and Economic Development Committee, on the Agriculture, State and Public Lands. I've worked with many of the different scenarios that a person will face on the SLIP board, the State Loan and Investment Board there, and the Land Board and the Building Commission. And so we'll be talking a little bit more about that here in the upcoming minutes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And now we're going to move into the questions. And I just want to mention to the audience that we're at Laramie County Fair right now, and there's a pie eating contest going on down below, so you can hear cheers going on. I don't know what it is. It's probably fairly engaging. But we're serious business here, so we will get right into the questions, and starting with Ms. Racinas. When Lindy Kirkbride contacted you, she indicated the first opening question would be 3 big issues facing the office you're running for and your response to them. And so that will start off our evening, so you have a minute and a half. Again, there'll be an optional 30-second response time, so go ahead.
First, yep, I think I turned off. Hello?
In conclusion, so I'd be remiss to not mention the current transparency issues that are going on with the auditor's office. That's clearly the hot topic right now. To me, knowing where our money goes, that's a non-negotiable issue. I will say it has been oversimplified a little bit. There's some actual structural barriers with the data right now that have to be sorted out to make that happen. But it has to happen. Whatever data can and should be out there has to. My understanding of the accounting system from working in it right now in my current position puts me in a really good place to understand the issues going on, some of the limitations that have delayed that release, and take care of it so we can move on and go about our business. The second thing I would say about this job is doing the job well, period, with excellence every day. You know, the auditing functions may have been removed from the office, but make no mistake, the auditor is the chief accountant of the state, the comptroller, and the official custodian of the state's accounting records. That clearly demands a financial background and an understanding. Of course, you're not like signing off on every single check, but you have to have that tone at the top of putting a high standard of excellence on the financial records of our state.
Third, there you go. Is it time?
No, it looks like it's kicking off. Oh, the battery's on. The battery's on.
It shut off magically at my 90 seconds. Like a.
Testing. Ready? The three issues that I have noted in this campaign, first of all, it is indeed transparency. If you believe in government that is off by and for the people, not off by and for itself, then the people need to know how their tax dollars are being spent. Wyoming historically has done a fairly good job of that. But around 2004, 2005, we began to allow no-bid contracts, primarily because we were allowing a lot of coal bed methane money to go in different avenues fairly quickly. But that set us up into a situation where we can't allow that to continue because government will get away from us. Transparency can happen, and it will be one of the main things I work on the moment I step into office. Secondly, we need to pay our bills on time. It's already been stated that we have been very high in the past, and as recent as March, we've been up to 6 weeks in paying our bills. And then thirdly, the turnover in the office. I think that with solid, kind, thoughtful, but steady leadership, it will be a good thing to make sure that we have evenness in the office. The other thing too is on these land boards where policy experience comes into play. When it comes, for instance, to state lands, those are to be managed for the highest and best benefit for our schools. Actually, the revenue that comes off of that goes right into our schools. And so we need to make sure that they are upheld in such a way where we're getting the best return on investment possible. Without going the way of Nebraska, I'll have to use my time in just a moment to finish that statement.
Thank you. The doctor.
So there's 3 opportunities. The first opportunity that needs to happen in the first 30 days is moving Wyoming from an F to a D or a C. Currently, if you go out to the state auditor's office, you can search vendor payments. And so let's say it's the start of quarter 2, the auditor puts up quarter 1, and you can search for 90 days. At the start of quarter 3, quarter 1 gets taken down, quarter 2 gets put up. What I want to do in my first 30 days to move Wyoming from an F to a C or a D is to put all of those old files out there online. Yes, they'll be in an Excel spreadsheet format or a spreadsheet format, but that allows for people to go out and search them, create their own pivot tables, etc. So move Wyoming from an F to an A. Okay? All 3 of us are going to ask the legislature for money. The key question is, what are we going to do if the legislature does not provide money? I'm the only candidate with a plan B, and that is I will open source this project. I will reach out to the University of Wyoming and our college students and see if we can get them involved in coding and developing the new website with that public information. The third thing that needs to happen, and this is what I'm calling a system health check. The state auditor just went live with a new online system. The auditor has a responsibility to visit with state agencies and to visit with stakeholders, to meet with them to ensure that the system is meeting functional expectations and to discuss things that the auditor's office can do to continue to improve that system. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And now an optional 30 seconds. Anyone who wants to take it, go ahead.
Please know that as a CPA, I can count to 3, and I only talked about 2 issues, so I apologize for that. The third, and by far maybe the most important, relates to the auditor's role on the slip board, on the land board. I am committed to the future of our state, and what the auditor needs to do is not just look at our situation now, but what does Wyoming look like in 5 years, 10 years, 30 years? We have to create a state where our kids, number one, want to stay or want to return to, and two, can stay or are able to return to.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Winters?
Yes, I wanted to follow up also on SLIB as well. And there are 3 major criteria one has to ask. First of all, is there skin in the game? Secondly, will that decision that is being made there, are we thinking about it 2 to 4 years ahead or 20 to 40 years into the future? And then thirdly, we need to make sure that we are planning all of these things in a way where we are able to finance them appropriately at the local level so that they can be sustainable in that local level.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Doctor, do you want to end your comment?
I'm assuming there'll be a SLIB question later, but with all the talk of the SLIB, there's 5 electeds who vote on the SLIB. So the auditor represents a 20% vote. There's $9 billion almost that goes through the auditor's office in a biennium. So my focus will also be on the SLIB, and I've got some comments on that, but I don't want to lose sight of the fact that there's $9 billion moving through the system, and we need to make sure that's flowing smoothly.
Okay, thank you. And we'll start now with Mr. Winters, but I'll just, interestingly enough, you all have touched on questions that are coming up, so you'll have a chance to drill down and get a lot more specific. So the issues must be obvious since we've all come up with them this evening. But right now, I'll start with you, Mr. Winters. The term transparency comes up practically in every candidate discussion this year, not just you, but on the city council on up, but especially for the state auditor. What does that mean, and how do you achieve that given the laws, workforce, and data management systems of the state auditor's office? What limitations are we working with?
I'd like to talk about that, first of all, from the perspective of the Wyoming State Auditor. And so we're not talking about different conservation districts or districts across the state. I can't speak to those. I do realize that it's very difficult for them to meet the GAP standards when oftentimes to try to actually fund that would cost more than those different districts even bring in. But from the Wyoming State Auditor's perspective, this is something that is achievable and is something, we already have a program called CGI that 21 other states are currently using to do that. There are 2 states, we and California and North Carolina. There are 2 other states along with us that do not provide this kind of data. But West Virginia is a great example of the direction we can go. They use the same software program we currently do. They actually have something called westvirginiacheckbook.gov. And on that, you can actually navigate very easily and look at how your tax dollars were spent over the previous year. They're using exactly the same products that we're using, they're just using them well. Now, if 47 states can put their checkbook online, and if 21 states can do that using the very same products that we have, I know that we can do the same thing. And so we need to just have the will and gumption to do it, and I've been blessed with that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Doctor?
So I'd like to address the data limitations. And like I said earlier, the auditor's office is already putting certain segments of information out there. So the auditor's office already knows what publicly identifiable information needs to be removed. When we talk about the laws and the workforce and how that benefits Wyoming, transparency can benefit Wyoming, there's 2 issues. One, diversification. The state has cut technology resources in the budget over the last several years. I mean, that's where agencies have cut. And to me, that means many decisions are being made without an understanding of what the data is telling us and what the financials are telling us. So I think transparency has a huge role in supporting Wyoming economies and Wyoming rural communities. Better understand their economic position and how they need to move forward. And that can help with growth as well. And so that's where I think transparency can help move Wyoming forward.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Racines?
One of the common misconceptions when we talk about vendors of the state, most of us think of contractors, companies, we think of these big, shady, and I'm not saying there is or isn't. The overwhelming majority of vendors of the state are individual humans, just like you and me. If you've ever sat on a jury, if you've ever been an employee, if you have ever received a travel reimbursement, if you have ever cashed a check from the state, you're a vendor. There's a lot of private information mixed in with a huge amount of data that can and should be public. Now, this is not a flaw of the system. As Nathan mentioned, other states use this system and have better transparency. This is a function of the way the data flows in and out of the system, the way the tables are set up behind the system, the way the chart of accounts works. This is nitty-gritty accounting stuff, and I think it's a mistake to say that anyone can go in on day one and just with will open the books, because we're going to end up on the front page of the New York Times for having broken HIPAA laws and IRS regulations and that sort of thing. Now, that's not a scare tactic or an excuse. It has to be done, period, but it has to be done carefully. This does involve an appropriation from the legislature, and one of the things, you're right, this is coming up in every single darn race, gubernatorial, legislative, and as auditor, I would hold their feet to the fire to make sure that they support this software that can make this happen, to parse out that information and get it out there in an understandable manner.
Okay, thank you. And another 30 seconds. Does anyone else want to take another shot at this?
Yes, thank you very much, Marguerite. Let me just say that as we talk about the nitty-gritty of this issue, we still need to have the data out there. It is possible even now to extract the data that shouldn't be there and allow those who are asking for it to get a hold of it. And so maybe it's a giant data dump, but they then have the responsibility of then turning it into something that is useful. But one has to understand there's two prongs to this. First of all, they deserve the data. And secondly, going long term, we then can turn it into something that is accessible at all times.
Okay, anyone else want to? Okay.
First of all, I appreciate this. This is fun. First of all, my salary is already out on openthebooks.com, so you all can go out and see what I make. Second of all, because of that, there's no legislative involvement needed on day one, because the current lawsuit does not involve a lawsuit against a violation of HIPAA data or a lawsuit against a violation of publicly identifiable information.
Okay, thank you.
We've talked about a lot about the information that already is available on the state auditor's website, but please understand, the reason that's available is because a real human is currently sorting through there to make sure we're not releasing information, and that's an inefficient way to go about business.
Okay, we'll go ahead and again, you know, if you have anything more to add in those closing 2 minutes, you can use that as the receptacle for everything you left unsaid. But now we're going to start with Mr. Doctor again. What is your management experience, and how will you structure the auditor's office? What changes would you make, and what do you want to keep?
So my management experience, I've been supervising since 2008 at the state of Wyoming. Before that, I supervised at the post office. So I bring 15, 20 years of experience, well, 15. My leadership style is I look at willing and able. I want to make sure that our staff is willing and able to accomplish the vision of the agency. If the employee is willing and able, then we're moving forward. If the employee is not willing, then as a supervisor and leadership team, we have an issue that we have to deal on the personnel side. If they're not able, then we have a training issue that we have to address. As far as restructuring, I haven't given a lot of thought to that because I had a lot of day one things. But on day one, week one, what I want to do, the first thing I'm going to do is go in and I want to sit down with each of the employees that are there. There's 24 as I currently understand it. And I want to spend 15 to 20 minutes to 30 minutes with them and just get a feel for where they're at in their jobs, what their duties are, what their responsibilities are, where they see opportunities for improvement, because it is wrong to go in and make wholehearted changes without understanding the successes of the operation and where folks on the ground who are actively working to produce outcomes that improve outcomes for citizens of Wyoming without hearing what they think is important.
Okay, thank you. Ms.
Could
Hastings?
I have you repeat the question real quick? I think I may have missed a portion of it.
Absolutely. What is your management experience, and how will you structure the auditor's office? What changes would you make, and what would you want to keep?
Okay, so starting out in my background, when I worked for the large public accounting firm here in Cheyenne, I was a senior associate there and supervised junior staff on audits. Currently, my role is the Chief Fiscal Officer and the Human Resources Director for the state's judicial branch. So in that role, I actively manage the audit department, all of the finances of the court, and also the Human Resources Department. So that means bringing together a budget of $80 million and 53 judges and justices to the table to make sure that happens correctly, on time, and get it passed through the legislature. I also directly supervise staff, but believe me, it's much harder to get folks to get on the same page that you do not supervise. So that's certainly a skill I hope I would bring to the table. As far as HR, I oversee the HR functions for about 340 employees right now. In my personal life, I also have chaired the board of Goodwill of Wyoming several times, which is a cause I'm passionate about. Also a graduate of Leadership Wyoming, some of you may be familiar with that. It's a great program, so there's a plug.
Thank you. Mr. Winters, do you want me to repeat it?
No, I think I got it.
Okay.
Thanks, Marguerite. As a pastor, inspiring volunteers and also hiring and administrating staff is actually one of the single most important functions that you have. A pastor works a whole lot more than on Sunday morning. And not only that, on the several boards that I've worked on, one of them a missionary tech team, building and administrating hospitals and churches and things like that all over the world. There have been a lot of those core administration skills that I've had to develop, and in many cases I've been the youngest guy by up to 2 decades at times on those boards. But it's important to have that so that you can bring calmness. Not only that, as parliamentarian for the state party, stepping in for the state Republican Party, stepping in at a time when tensions were high, it was for that very reason that I have the ability to bring a calming influence. So the question is, what does that mean for the office? Well, many people talk about what they're going to do the first 100 days. The wisest thing to do before you ever take a step is to make sure in those first 100 days you know where you're going to step first. So first of all, you go and you speak to the people that work there. Secondly, you go and visit the fiscal staff of the agencies that interact with your office on a day-to-day basis. And you get the input from what they're going through on the ground. Secondly, I've also had to develop a lot of administrative policy skill because we have to make a lot of those kind of decisions in the legislature and on the Legislative Management Audit Committee. These all matter in a major way, but I've been blessed with the opportunity to develop those skills.
Okay, thank you. And,
I'm good on the follow-up.
okay, want to add anything?
I'll take it because I didn't answer the second question as far as how would I structure the office. It really is about going in and talking to the people. I'm familiar with most of the staff in the office. As the CFO of the judicial branch, I interface with them constantly and understand some of the opportunities and challenges they're facing. They're very tired. They have gone through a gigantic accounting system upgrade. There's been a huge amount of turnover in that office, as I believe Nathan mentioned. They're facing a huge amount of uncertainty right now. So first off, it's about assessing where you are before you figure out where you're going to leap without careful consideration.
Okay, thank you. Did you want to add anything, Mr. Winters, or?
Actually, these are policies that I have expressed as well, very much. And I want the people that work there to know that I care right now. And there's a principle that I follow called servant leadership. And that's where it's my desire to serve you so that you can best serve the people of the state of Wyoming. And so servant leadership has been the heart that has driven everything that I've done in leadership. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And we'll start with you, Mr. Cenas, now. So if you are elected auditor, do you expect to have to go to the legislature for authority or funding to achieve your goals?
That's an excellent question. As far as the transparency issue relates, yes, I think that is indeed all of our plan A, to go to the legislature and get the funding. I think that will be successful. I think we will have the buy-in there. If we do not, there are efficiencies to be gained in that office. There are certain things where I think we're not necessarily considering risk and maybe spending too much time in the wrong places. Now, that's not a criticism of the current auditor. It's just the way I see things from my seat right now. So I think there could be some improvement to free up staff time in the auditor's office to dedicate to transparency without additional financial resources. That being said, I've been testifying to joint appropriations for years for my budget right now. So I'm certainly familiar with that process. I'm familiar with the budgeting, the budget of the state and the way that goes through the legislature, and certainly would hope to be successful in that endeavor.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Winters, do you want me to repeat the question?
I believe I got it.
Okay.
The authority or funding to achieve goals. Let me just say this. There are several things that I believe we can do right off the bat. First, transparency is a two-part question. There is a lot of data that can be useful right now that we can turn over. The second one is, yes, indeed, we're going to have to go with an exception request, which was already tried this last year. We're going to bring that right back to make sure that we can build an appropriate website to get this transparency piece up and running. The other thing that I want to focus on, and it will take a continued partnership with the legislature, and that is I've worked already the last 2 years on 2 major efficiency bills. And in those efficiency bills, we have uncovered, first of all, in the first bill, with the first 3 largest agencies, several places where we can realize efficiency that may save the state of Wyoming up to $200 million. The second one was this last year, we were able to do the same thing with all the rest of the agencies. Well, there is a seat on the board, and I made sure, and I argued for that on the floor, to make sure that the auditor has a seat on that board so that later the reporting and transparency aspect of what we find through these efficiency studies can be reported properly to the people of the state of Wyoming and back to the legislature. And so it's going to take relationship skill and team building, and actually a relationship currently with the legislature will come in as a very important feature. And so all of these are things that I believe will help, but it's going to be authority on the one hand and funding on the other, but there are several things that we can do before we even have to go to them.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Doctor? Do you want me to repeat the question?
No, I think I got it. Thank you, though. So my answer is yes, no, and maybe. Yes, with regards to the website. The fastest way to get the most functional, user-friendly system is to ask the legislature for money. But once again, what if the legislature does not provide funding? And I want to ask you all, have you heard your individual legislator say, yes, I am going to go in this session and I'm going to vote yes on money? No, you haven't. So that's why I have a plan B. We're going to discuss that. The answer is no, as far as some of the authority. We got a 12-year, $64 million contract that needs to be sorted out, and it's an information technology contract. As you're going to move forward and support state agencies, and you're going to listen to their needs and build a system that continues to reduce paperwork and streamline efficiencies, that's on you as the state auditor. And the maybe is when it comes to the efficiency study with the human resources information system. There's a request out there, a recommendation from the efficiency study talking about having a single human resources information system that works with the payroll system. As the state auditor, you're going to have a role in participating in that, and you're going to have to determine your leadership role with that and how you're going to work with other state agencies to move that project forward. And there may be some money associated with that, or you may have to look at how you can use your contract and you can partner with other agencies to get that done to continue to move Wyoming forward.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone want to take another 30 seconds?
I'll take it.
Okay.
Just on the efficiency real quick, the first bill passed in 2017 created a government efficiency commission, and I was appointed a member of that inaugural commission and really dug in deep as far as what efficiencies we thought could be gained. It's a great report. I hope we use it. I hope it comes to fruition. That being said, we talk about improving processes a lot. The processes the auditor does, they are things like accounts payable, vendor management, accounts receivable. If you don't understand those processes, it's difficult to improve them.
Okay, thank you. Anyone want another 30 seconds? Okay, well then we'll start now with Mr. Wintersfield for this question. And this kind of, again, refers to something that some of you have already kind of mentioned. As one of the top 5 elected officials, the auditor serves on the Board of Land Commissioners. The board manages 3.5 million acres of school trust lands with the constitutional duty of generating revenue for the beneficiaries, the school children. How would you balance the disputes that arise when other interests seem to challenge the fiduciary duty of the board to produce revenue for schools? There was one this morning, as a matter of fact. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but anyway, so a minute and a half if you can delve into this.
Certainly. And I think this is where policy experience really matters, because we've watched this in other states as well, where people will come in and their desire actually is to try to let this out actually to the highest bidder. And that can be very dangerous. State land should be managed for its highest and best use and its greatest increase into coffers because it actually directly helps schools. One of the things that we've seen already in Nebraska is where they changed a law that allowed for individuals to come in and just place the highest bid. And individuals who have worked that land, their families have been on there 3 or 4 generations, will be outbid, sometimes by outside groups who just want the land to lie fallow. And what happens over time is there's no revenue being generated from those lands. That's a dangerous precedent to set. Someone needs to understand how it impacts ag, how it impacts minerals, and how there are forces at work in states around us that over time can become very detrimental to us. And so you need that understanding, that background, and actually the conservative values that can see through the smoke screen sometimes that is sent up in these areas.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Doctor, would you like me to repeat the question? It's kind of a mouthful.
Please.
Okay. So as one of the top 5 elected officials, the auditor serves on the Board of Land Commissioners, which manages 3.5 million acres of school trust land with the constitutional duty of generating revenue for the beneficiaries, the school children. How would you balance the disputes that arise when other interests seem to challenge the fiduciary duty of the board to produce revenue for schools?
So, I think in that situation, you have to evaluate and listen. You have to make sure that the public is heard. You have to make sure that the processes that are in place at the state land and investment boards, that those are followed to a T. And then you have to make a decision. You have, like Nathan said, you have to understand the impact. And what that means is, for me, it means what is the best solution that gives Wyoming a win-win, right? So what helps our schools, what helps what helps our schools and our environment. But your job is to make a decision. You vote yes or you vote no. And so if someone disagrees with your dispute or disagrees with your vote, then you have to be prepared to stand up and talk with them about it, listen, but ultimately you have to own it. And that's my statement.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Macinas, would you want me to repeat the question?
No, I'm fine. Stepping onto one of these boards, I think it's incredibly easy to say you won't be swayed by those interests and incredibly hard in practice. And I recognize that I think every person that has ever stepped onto one of those boards has struggled with that immensely. So it is about making sure you know and you keep in the forefront of your mind that constitutional purpose and the fiduciary duty of these boards to manage for the school funding. That's incredibly important to me on a micro level. I have 2 children that I choose to send to public schools. So I think about that. I think about that daily. I think about the education I got and the education I want for them and the education, again, that I want 30 years down the road in Wyoming. That being said, you do have those interests, those forces. I like to think that I understand the way those play into our state. My grandparents were in ranching. I certainly understand how critical ag is to our care of the land, our economy. That being said, I was fed and educated and housed by oil and gas. So I have that in my blood as well and understand how important that is and how big of a piece of that plays in the funding on those state lands. Lastly, land use is critical and public access is critical. You know, I'm an avid sportsman. I'm a hunter. I put meat in the freezer like some of you do each fall. And so balancing those, but making sure we remember maximizing and a better word is optimizing our revenue for the schools.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Winters, you want to?
Yes, and just a minute. This is the reason why the Wyoming State Auditor remains in elected position when more than half of the states in the U.S. do not elect their auditor. Is because there are policy decisions to be made. In most places where it simply is numbers, where the state auditor's office actually functions the way the Wyoming Department of Audit, separate agency, works. In those places, they don't elect their auditor. But here we do, and it's because you need to have discernment. You need to have the understanding of these major policy issues. And that's where having the wisdom and thinking and study on these is very important.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else want to take another run at this topic? Okay.
Of all the boards I've served on, one thing I've noted, It's no good to have 5 attorneys making a decision, or 5 lawyers, or 5 bankers, or 5 teachers. You really have to have a variety of backgrounds. And when we look at these decisions to manage the lands for our school kids, by and large, they are financial decisions for their state. Obviously, there's a huge amount of non-financial that goes into that as well. So I do feel like the auditor has the responsibility to bring that keen financial eye, because if you're looking at the data, it is a huge amount of financial information to absorb.
Okay, thank you. And that concludes our questions. So we'll go into the 2-minute closing, and the mic is yours, Ms. Medina. So, and you can use the 2 minutes any way you want to add something that we didn't get to, or to amplify, or to sum up. So 2 minutes.
Could I do an interpretive dance?
That would be refreshing. That would be
I'm
great.
trying to keep it entertaining. You all could be at the pie eating conversation, or competition. In conclusion, you know, we've talked a lot about the role of the auditor and the skills that we all think the auditor should bring. And I sort of separate that into 2 categories. First off, the auditor, and not just the auditor, all of our top 5 electeds have to have Wyoming perspective, period. You have to know what makes Wyoming tick. I've spent time in all 23 counties prior to this campaign. I've lived in 5 different communities. But I'll tell you, I'm smart enough to know there's a heck of a lot I don't know about our state. So it is about going to the hinterlands, showing up with open eyes and open ears. You know, what works for Bar None, where I started out my life, isn't gonna work for Riverton. What works for Riverton isn't gonna work in Cheyenne. What works for Cheyenne isn't gonna work in Lovell. That's where that is critical on the boards that the auditor serves on. The second thing though, all that perspective doesn't matter if you can't do the day job of the auditor. The auditor very much still is the financial professional for the state. And the way I would describe it, it's a job that no one notices or thinks about until it's not done well. I joke that this is not the sexy elected official, and that's true. But this job has to be done. It has to be done solid. We have to pay the bills of the state. If you don't have a strong financial backbone, a system beneath your entity, you don't get to do anything else. The auditor isn't a lawmaker, doesn't set the budget, doesn't pass the budget, doesn't cut the budget, but is responsible for keeping track of every dollar on the back end, making sure it's available for our needs when and where we need it. So as a CPA and a CFO, I'm ready to discharge the statutory duties of the auditor, and I bring the Wyoming perspective that we need on our boards to really look at Wyoming's future. Not just for this generation, not just for the next one, but down the road. I would ask for your vote on August 21st.
Thank you very much. Mr. Winters, 2 minutes.
Well, let me just say it's been a pleasure to be here. I grew up here in Cheyenne, and I've spent a lot of time out in that parking lot going to fairs and different things like that. And so it's great to be back. I've also been blessed with the privilege of representing small communities, such as the one I'm from now in Thermopolis. And I guess the best way to try to help you understand the differences, because I have 2 wonderful individuals that I have the privilege of running against, and we've actually all become friends in this race, is to actually explain to you why the Wyoming Realtors Association endorsed me, because I learned a lot from that. I was told if I really need to recommend someone for the Wyoming Department of Audit, one of my opponents would be tremendous with their accounting background, would be tremendous for that place. The other one with IT, in the Department of A&I, or actually bringing someone in to work with our information systems within the state auditor's office, that would be tremendous. But for these individuals, the realtors who deal with the slip board, who deal with the state land board, who deal with the building commission and understand the interplay, after 30 minutes of interviewing me and interviewing my opponents, all of us separately, they said, you clearly demonstrate the leadership skill and the policy experience where you understand the office. Well, I'm blessed by that. It actually is one of those things where it demonstrates that all 3 of us have particular skills that can be brought to bear. And so with that, I would ask for you to vote Nathan Winters for State Auditor August 21st, because what we really need is an auditor who understands the office and is willing to set the vision and the pace without allowing themselves to be so absorbed into the framework of state government that they become ineffective with the micromanagement. And so we need that skill and that balance. And so I ask for your vote. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Doctor, you're going to have the final word tonight.
Well, thank you. Real estate, the real estate board, they want people who are going to help them sell real estate. So I'm just going to leave that at that. My position on the slip, to counter that, is in 1925, a young lady came to Wyoming. She was up in Grand Tetons, and she died. And when they looked through her journal, her name was, I forget her name right now, Helen Meller. And she wrote in her diary, "God bless Wyoming and keep it wild." And that when I was looking for a philosophy for the slip, that was the philosophy I chose to take, because I think it was a great statement in 1925, and it set a great vision for Wyoming. I think it's an even more important statement in 2018 and 2025, and I think it sets a hell of a vision for 21, 25 and where Wyoming needs to be. As far as being a Wyoming perspective, I'm a fourth generation from the West. I grew up in Montana. I've traveled around. I've lived it. Like when I left Circle, Montana, I left because there was no economic opportunity, and I left to pursue my dreams. And finally, I don't want to get away from the fact that this is, once again, a technology office. There are day-to-day responsibilities. Wyoming receives an F in transparency today. Out of everything you've heard today, I'm the only candidate with a day one plan to move Wyoming from an F to hopefully a D or C. I'm the only one who has a plan that says, what if the Wyoming legislature doesn't provide funding? I'm the guy with the plan B to make that happen, to engage our students. And so I am through to the general, but I do look forward to your vote on November 6th. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can we give them a hand, please? For doing a good job. Thank you, Ann. So we're going to take just a couple minutes break to switch out the names tags, and then we'll get on to the treasurer's race. Thank you.
Closed primaries. That means that if you are a registered Democrat or Republican, you are going to receive a Democrat or Republican ballot in the primary. People will come and look at their ballot and say, the person I want to vote for is not here. Well, that's because you don't belong to that person's party. So know that and think about it. You can change your registration on election day, but it's a closed primary. And in the treasurer's race, the person who wins the primary is going to go on to the general election with no opponent. So the person will be the presumptive winner after the primary, and that's one reason why primaries are very important in Wyoming for Republican candidates. Again, description of the candidates in alphabetical order. Leland Christensen is a Republican from Alta, where he was raised on a ranch, ran a logging business, and works now as an auctioneer. He served 15 years in the 19th Special Forces Airborne, Wyoming National Guard, and 20 years in the Lecon County and Teton County Sheriff's Office. He's also been a Teton County Commissioner for 2 terms and is serving as Senator from Senate District 17. He's chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee and serves on Transportation, Highways, and Military Affairs Committee, among other assignments. Kurt Meyer is a Republican who grew up in LaGrange, Wyoming, on a farm, helping his family. He graduated from the University of Wyoming with a degree in agricultural economics. He worked as a farmer, his father, and then continued on his own, operating an irrigated farm of over 3,000 acres. He is a senator from Senate District 3 and has been for 22 years. This session, he served on the Agricultural, State, and Public Lands and Water Resources Committee and chaired Transportation, Highways, and Military Affairs until May 31st, among other responsibilities. There is another candidate who is not here, and his name is Ron Gredo. He's a Republican who was born in California and has worked in the Wyoming Workers' Compensation Division and has been a truck driver for the last 14 years. Marguerite.
All right, thank you. Again, my name is Marguerite Herman. I'm moderator for tonight, a member of the Cheyenne League of Women Voters. And just to let you know the format for tonight, it's going to be a 2-minute to open, and 1.5 minutes for each question with an optional 30 seconds you can take to either add on to your own or respond to the other candidate, then 2 minutes to close. And feel free to use the opening and closing any way you want. It's really for your use to talk about yourself. And we have a timer here who's going to let you know as time expires, especially as you're getting close. And we will be alternating the beginning when we starts the round. And so we will start now with 2 minutes with Mr. Christensen. And I apologize for misspelling Mr. Christensen's name. However, on your ballot, it will be spelled correctly, I guarantee you. But anyway, so with that, you can have 2 minutes and go ahead and start, and your mic should be live there. Thank you.
My name's Leland. Thank you, Marguerite. Thank you to the league. My name's Leland Christensen. I'm running to serve as your next state treasurer. In our current budget, we face roughly $1 billion structural deficit. And in spite of streamlining and cutting, we were once again forced to dip into our savings. We can't do that forever. Wyoming can and must increase its investment returns while remaining prudent. I'm the best prepared candidate to bring increased returns, not new taxes. Last fall, our current treasurer approached me and asked if I'd consider running for treasurer. And then he laid out how we could do better going forward. In this most recent legislative session, former treasurer Cynthia Lummis came over and said, Leland, we need you to run for treasurer. And then she talked about how my experiences, my background, my training made me the right candidate to help Wyoming succeed going forward and getting those increased investment returns. In speaking with others around the state and investment professionals, I found that we do have real opportunities to improve our financial health, and that's going to be critical to our success going forward. Currently, we talk about a gap in between our expenditures and our revenues and how that has been filled with our savings. Well, when we run out of the savings, we're going to have to change something, and increased investment returns can be the key to keeping Wyoming income tax free. My first priority will just be a little 1% increase for starters. That can bring up to $200 million new dollars, and this is how we're going to solve the funding crisis for education and for our seniors, not with savage cuts or raising taxes. I have a very simple platform: increase investment returns, not taxes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Meyer, 2 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you for the introduction, and I want to thank the League of Women Voters for this forum opportunity tonight, and I want to thank all of you guys out there. That is one of the ways to get us out of the hole, and that is, it actually is with increased investment returns, but it's a simple concept. However, it is a bit more complicated than one might imagine. And frankly, I believe I am the best prepared for this job, and we'll find out a little bit about that tonight, I think. But I'm going to tell you why, a couple of things why I do believe I'm the best prepared. I've been a businessman for 36 years, running a multi-million-dollar agricultural business, employed up to 53 employees, 8 years on the Appropriations Committee, and 10 years on the Retirement System Board as a liaison. And that's a multi-billion-dollar public fund. And my plan simply is to do what we've done so well at the retirement system and interject that into the Treasury's office. And we've had over a 14% return in this last year. We're doing very well. The Treasurer was about 9%, that's about a 5%. Now, at that $200 million, that's $1 billion. I'm not claiming I'm going to give you $1 billion. That would be puffery and very, very inconsiderate of me to even say that. But I do believe what we actually need is 2.38%, and the reason I believe that is because I've worked with the LSO staff, I've worked with the folks down there on appropriations, and that really gets us right in the sweet spot, and that's my goal.
Okay, thank you very much. You can hold on to keep the microphone because we'll be starting the questions. So the only question we gave the candidates beforehand with the original invitation was 3 big issues, main issues facing them in their office and in their response to it. And so So we'll start with that one, and then we'll get into some more specific questions the league has put together. So a minute and a half, 3 major issues you see facing the office in response to it. Mr. Meyer.
I think the first thing that we're looking at is the reorganization of and the development of an investment team. And those are the first 2. And then there's a couple of structural things that we're going to need to do with the legislature. We've got a really good chief investment officer, does great with fixed assets. It's a 3-man team. He's taken one individual who's an analyst from the retirement system and brought in there. They're doing a relatively good job in a time when you have increased interest rates in a fixed asset environment. That's a tough one. But we don't really have the expertise in private equities, in other equities, in alternative investments, and that's where we need to beef up the bench, so to speak. In the retirement system, we're looking at a 9-man team there. We want to do the same thing in that regard. Then the structural things that we're going to have to do, that's going to be a little bit more. But I'm really excited to do that because I know we can get the job done.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Christensen. 3 big issues, 3 main issues.
Well, when you think about the treasurer's office, it really gets down to largely 3 issues. And the first one is about our investments. How do we take care of our treasury? The second one, of course, is the different boards and commissions, primarily the State Land and Investment Board, and how it affects our state. And then the other one is returning unclaimed property, and that's a big issue. And that one, our current treasurer's done a great job with and has that on track. And on the others, there's some real improvement, and he's done a nice job with it. But when we talk about increased investment returns, what we're talking about here is changing our position relative to other sovereign wealth funds. And in the last 1, 3, 5, and 10-year measurements, while we have seen our treasury really strengthen and supplement our state budget, we've been down in the bottom quartile. And so we have some real opportunities to improve those returns while remaining prudent. We're not talking about gambling and getting risky. We're talking about just moving our investment performance up to scale. And that's where we start to see these real opportunities to stop the conversation about raising taxes, to stop the conversations about how deep can we cut before we bleed or before we hit the bone. Our 3 big budgets, WIDOT, the Department of Health, and Education. I think those are very important and high priorities for Wyoming. So let's take care of our investment returns. Let's work on those boards, and as we go through tonight, we'll talk a little more about that, but we have real opportunities ahead of us.
Okay, thank you. Does either one of you want to take another 30 seconds to add on?
Well, WIDOT's federally funded. The general funds are almost totally taken out of it, and it's funded by federal funds and gas taxes. The investment funds necessarily don't go into that, so even though it's a big part of our budget, it's necessarily a big part. It's not a big part of what we actually spend our money on. You really got to get into the Medicaid and the health department to really get into the areas where we actually spend both federal and general funds. And that's where going into the job, 8 years on appropriations, I understand those things.
Thank you. You want another 30 seconds here?
You know, when I bring up WIDOT and being one of our big ticket items, it is a big ticket item, but the key to WIDOT is having the money available to go for those match funds. If we don't have the money in our budget to go after those match funds, we may save a little bit, not be able to pay that out, but our losses are incredible. We're talking about a 25% match to get access to real money. And so while those federal funds are critical and the largest part of it, if we can't make up our match, Wyoming suffers.
Okay, thank you. And go ahead and hold on to the mic, and we will go to the next question. What is your background in finance, and how will you get up to speed with all the funds and investment policies under the Treasurer's authority? Whom and what will you rely on in managing $20 billion in funds?
That is a great question, and I talk about that all across the state. Earlier I talked about our former treasurer, Cynthia Lonis, coming over and talking about how my background was the right one going forward. And as she laid it out, and as I've researched it, I believe she's right. And it's about management. It's not about being the chief investment officer. That's a very specialized profession. But what it takes in this job as treasurer is someone who has a track record, someone who's proven to be able to bring teams together and get the best performance out of them, keep them motivated, and keep them all engaged and energetic. That's how we'll see our best returns. It's the best and the brightest team for our investments. It's not about the treasurer being the stock picker. When we think about that, and I go back to my background, I learned about teamwork on the farm and in business. I also found out that one person doesn't make a business successful. You've got to be able to bring people together and keep them working together. And it was the same way down in the legislature. So this background and this experience, I've been tested, I've been proven, and I think that is really what sets me apart in this race, is a successful history of bringing people together. It is about managing people, about being responsive to people on the investment side and also on the SLIB and the board side. My background as a county commissioner and knowing how to work with people and understand the problems and then finding the best solutions, that all comes into play, and that's what it's going to take to really move our state treasurer's office forward and get the best service for Wyoming.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Monner, do you want me to repeat the question? Okay, thank you. Minute and a half.
I guess what I can say is that I bring the best of both worlds. I have management skills, large operation, 36 years in business. I've chaired 2 different committees, transportations, military affairs, and also the corporations and political subdivisions, elections, 8 years on appropriations. The reason that we can have the luxury of trying to figure this out is the $2.2 billion that we saved while I was on that committee. And the other part of the best of both worlds is that myself personally, I've returned 17.66% of my own stock account since 1989. That's not too shabby. And working with the multi-billion-dollar public fund, that's a state retirement system. The state treasurer sits on that fund, and we've done a great job. I've been on the selection committees for the key positions that made that happen, and working with a great team down there on the board. These are some of the most insightful people that you'll ever want to get around. And so I do have that team building, I do have that management skills, and I do have those leadership skills. Nathan Winters clicked off a bunch of the things he's been on. We'd be here all night long if we started down that road with me. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Another 30 seconds, are we? Okay, we're done with the question. And if something hurts you later, you can bring it up on your final statement. The legislature, State Building Commission, Loan Investment Board, and Investment Funds Committee all assist the treasurer to know issues and roles. What might be hot issues for this team? Will you pursue the Peterson Institute transparency criteria to enable the state to continue to be the #1 state and 3rd in the world in transparency? So there are a couple of pieces there. Do you want me to repeat it? It's kind of a, okay. And we'll start with Mr. Griffiths.
First, our current treasurer has done a great job and has been recognized for having a very transparent office. And you can go onto the internet, go onto the web, and find all kinds of information both about our strategy, our performance, and the way we're aligned with asset allocation. As far as going forward and continuing that work, I think we play to our success. We continue to build on what really is a very successful team. And all you have to do is walk into the office and you get a sense of these good people who like to come to work. They enjoy the job and they're motivated and they're fighters for Wyoming. My background, again, I learned about that in hard lessons on how one person can't be successful without great people around them. And here we have it in this office, those kind of good people already on this job. And then how do we help them better succeed and get those increased returns that are going to be so critical? Wyoming doesn't need to be in these conversations about the cutting and the taxing. Let's allow these folks to do the work. Let's allow them to continue to progress their plan. There's been a plan and evolution in that office. It started a few years ago, but one of the big ones 2 years ago was the constitutional amendment, Amendment A. And then we also found that the legislature needed to step up and do a little bit of work in that, and we did that. And then we found that in order to save millions in fees, we needed a great team. And that goes right back to my background in team building and keeping good teams productive.
Thank you. Mr. Meyer, do you want me to repeat the question? Okay, we had a couple of moving parts. The legislature, State Building Commission, Loan and Investment Board, and Investment Funds Committee all assist the treasurer to know issues and roles. What might be hot issues for this team? Will you pursue the Peterson Institute transparency criteria to enable the state to continue to be number one, the top state, and third in the world in transparency?
First of all, I've served on the State Building Commission, so I know the roles of the State Building Commission quite well. Then, if we look at the transparency issue there are a couple of things that I think we can improve on. One is the front page of the report when we're including the contributions to the system from the severance tax before we realize the losses or the gains. And so that can have the opportunity of masking some of the gains and masking some of the losses too. So that's something that we need to work on. There's another hot topic that I think that we need to look at, and this is the morale of not only the folks in the office there, but the folks across all of our public employees. We haven't had a raise in 9 years, and we're putting more on that on the retirement system side. So we've got a problem. We're going to have a brain drain, and that's one of the things that's motivating me to make sure that we do get these investment returns. I mean, you got to have a reason to do these things. You just don't say, I want more investment returns, and put a number on the page. You know, and that's one of the reasons why I'm excited about this job, because we do need to pay for economic development. We do need to pay for those employees and balancing the budget.
Okay, thank you. Does, do you want another, are we done with that? You would like another comment on that? No? Okay.
I could go on and on.
Okay, well-
Telling you how and why takes about at least 45 minutes.
Okay,
So
well, we won't-
anybody
we won't
wants
delve into that.
Talk afterwards.
Yeah, these candidates, I'm sure, would be happy to talk if you wanted to get in touch with them at another time, and you have online. So, I think it was Mr. Christensen mentioned the Amendment A. 2 years ago, the voters approved a constitutional change to allow the treasurer to invest pooled agency funds in equities. What are your plans? And this will start with Mr. Christensen.
Didn't you, sir?
I'm sorry, Mr. Meyer, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yes. So, what are your plans to select the right agencies for that pool, and also your plans to get that money invested?
Okay. First of all, I was on the Appropriations Committee when we passed Amendment A and brought it and put it on the floor so the treasurer could do a great job getting it passed. So I've been involved in Amendment A from the beginning. And I do have a specific concrete plan that I want to do with streamlining that. It wasn't a perfect bill, and this is one way that we can help that. Right now, you got to go back to the legislature to get approval of any of those 400 and some accounts that we have in the treasurer's office to put into that alternative investment scheme or scenario. And what we really need to do is do what we do in a lot of areas in the treasurer's office, in the top 5, is that let the slip board do that. Let the slip board make that decision, with one caveat, that the rainy day fund, which is about $1.6 billion, stays under the purview of the legislature. That should be theirs. They should determine when they do that. Now, interestingly enough, we're only 25% equities on that, but yet we've only got a probability of making the CPI plus 2 of 45%. We got 56% in some of our other funds, and we've got a probability of 50% making that. And so, you know, there's some things that I want to get into that a little bit more clearer. We get the right analysts hired, I can ask the right questions, so we get the right answers and move in the right direction.
Thank you. Mr. Christian, you want me to repeat the question? Okay. So 2 years ago, the voters approved a constitutional change to allow the treasurer to invest pooled agency funds in equities. What are your plans to select the right agencies for that pool and also to get the money invested?
At the same time that we brought Constitutional Amendment A to the voters, the legislature also put together a bill, Treasurer's Advisory Group. And so not only did we allow for changing the ratio to go to the stock market side over to the stock side, but we also brought in more skills and more tools. I think that's the key to doing better. We've got some really experienced individuals out there that have great qualifications that are also now part of this team. They look at the markets, they look at our program, they come back with recommendations. The treasurer then takes that to SLIB, and there's a real vetting process going back and forth. And that's what we need to do to be careful when we go after these increased returns, that we don't put ourselves in a riskier position. You know, there's an idea out there called the efficient frontier, and Wyoming has been very conservative, largely investing on the bond side. And so as a result, we've had very low, relatively low returns. We can go up to 70% for the majority of our money onto the stock side. And as we do that and go toward that, we're going to be able to reap those increased returns following the market. It doesn't mean we're not careful. It doesn't mean we're not prudent and that we hire the very best advisors. But again, this is where it comes back to keeping the best professionals both on the team and tapping into the best professionals in the industry.
Okay, thank you. Want to add on to that?
Yeah.
Sure.
And really, the best professionals, the treasurer has to have something involved in that because they help making those decisions. And if you don't have the background and experience, if you've never owned stocks before and you've never invested at all, then you come into the job with a deficiency as far as the understanding the basic premise of what investments are. And you have to have the basic understanding so that you can be part of the solution.
Okay, Mr. Christensen, did you want to add to the comment, respond?
I would agree with that, and our background in history with mutual funds has proven successful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And this will be the last question, and we'll start with Mr. Christensen. And it's very similar to the one I asked the auditors. As one of the top 5 elected officials, the treasurer serves on the Board of Land Commissioners. The board manages 3.5 million acres of school trust land with the constitutional duty of generating revenue for the beneficiaries, school children. How would you handle the disputes that arise when other interests seem to challenge that fiduciary duty?
Well, first, I think it's important to look at a person's history and what have they done in the past. And on this particular topic, if you recall, 8 years ago, our past governor looked at some school trust land landlocked inside Teton National Park and said we need to get a better return on that. So when I came down to the legislature, I brought a bill forward to allow Wyoming to do a deal with the federal government. It allowed for the continued protection and public access of those lands, but at the same time, we were able to bring over $60 million from land that wasn't producing relatively anything and take that money and bring it back into performance for the school accounts. And so already have a track record on making sure that those lands are producing at the same time protecting them. And I'll tell you, one of my key values on this is that public lands are incredibly valuable. I'm a multi-use person. We grew up, our family has benefited from the public lands over the years. And when we get down to the school lands, I think the school lands need to be focused on what can they do for education. Not talking about selling them, but making sure as they're leased out, as they're used, that they're productive, and it's a win-win for Wyoming citizens and our school systems, and again, always with an eye toward multiple use.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Meyer.
Thank you, that's a great question. And a year ago, I do have a lot of experience in this area because I've served on the Water and Public Lands Committee for a good number of years. And that's one of those issues that comes up from time to time. And as far as my own personal experience, a lot of it has to do with access and the multiple use concept. And I don't know if you guys remember the problems that we had on the backside of Laramie Peak here last year. Because they're going to do a land transfer and basically lock that thing up to where nobody can hunt the backside of Laramie Peak. And so I called it to the State Land Board. I got involved. That's constituent service. That's one of the things that's kept me in this job for so long, is constituent service. You know, we do have to, the Constitution says it's going to inure to the benefit of the children and our education system. And we have to be cognizant of that. But you have to realize that land is going to last a long time, folks, and that you have to make decisions that aren't, you know, quick needs, snap judgments. You're going to get another $100, you know, for this piece of land next year, so let's, you know, throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, and get that money in. You make decisions that are going to make sure that the land stays in full production. And we can add value to a lot of these areas. I know that we've got some school sections up in our county where we got irrigation on them. That makes a lot of difference.
Okay, thank you. Does either one of you want to add another 30 seconds on this? Alrighty. Well, then we will move into the 2-minute closing, and we will start with Mr. Meyer. And again, feel free to use the 2 minutes any way you like, and go ahead and start when you're ready.
Guys, I think you'll see with me is that what you see is what you get. I'm going to be upfront with you. We're going to have an open office. I know how to do the job. I've already talked to a lot of employees down there. I've known the deputy director since I served on the State Board of Education under Diana Ullman. Pat Harp's a great hand. Talked extensively with the Chief Investment Officer there, Patrick Fleming. There's some things that we can do to tweak that. We lost $15 million last week in capital gains because we couldn't do a transaction on a timely basis, and just the differences between the transaction times. You know, that was 15%. So, you know, I know the details. I know the broad overscope. I have the management skills, and I'm excited to do this because I know that that's the one office that can impact the economy, balance the budget, pay our educational bills, and actually put enough money back in there to where we might be able to start paying our employees a little bit more than they've had in the past. Because we're getting a problem with that. It's a big problem, and we're going to get a brain drain, and it's going to come right out of this community and across our state. And so it's just going to be a great, great future for Wyoming because we've got a good team coming on.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Christensen, you're going to get the final word tonight, 2 minutes.
Well, when we think about the duties of the treasurers and the opportunities, we think about SLID, we think about the land boards and what they can do for us. And I'm a big supporter in investing in Wyoming. As a county commissioner, I saw the effect when Wyoming dollars come back to Main Street, not just Wall Street. But as with so many of these programs, for us to be able to invest in Wyoming, it's going to take increased investment returns on our treasury. And I'm very confident that with the right team, we can get those increased investment returns while remaining prudent. That's the key. Protect our savings and do better in the future. As we focus on this, it's not just about bridging the gap in the short run, and we can do that with those increased returns, but it's also going to be having a vision going forward. When we see this next oil play come in and we have some money to work with, working with the legislature, having the right relationships in place to be able to talk about not spending everything that comes in, but instead continuing to build our treasury, build our strength, so that when the next swing in the mineral industry appears, Wyoming is in a position where we're not vulnerable. We can use this treasury, we can play to our strengths, and we can go forward. And with the right teamwork, folks, this is how we're going to really set Wyoming up for success for the next generation. And the opportunity in your treasurer's office and in leadership and working with your legislature, the future's bright, here to tell you, but it's going to take someone with the right track record of being able to work with both elected officials, our citizens, and our government employees to find that magic push to really set us forward. Thank you. Appreciate your vote and appreciate your support over these past few months.
Thank you very much. Can we please give them a hand for a great job?